Welcome back, my dear crime lovers. This is a new episode of the History of the American Mafia, a series brought to podcast by Fabio Fabiano, read and translated by me, Grace Cadlisi. I do hope you enjoy this new episode. This is the first of a 3-part series on Frank Costello, so without further ado, let's start with part 1. If there was ever a mobster who looked and resembled a politician, it was without doubt Frank Costello. It was no coincidence that he was nicknamed the Minister of the Underworld. We can unquestionably state that Costello must be classified at a different level as the many mobsters who gave birth to the American organized crime. What distinguished Frank Costello from his criminal colleagues was that his criminal power was not linked exclusively to violence, but also to his ability to make large sums of illicit profits during the Prohibition era with slot machines and other gambling operations. In fact, he controlled the majority of the gambling industry in New York, Florida, Louisiana, and other states, and the casinos in Las Vegas too. He was very influential in the political organization known as Tammany Hall that determined New York's politics in those years. In fact, Tammany Hall was connected with the Democratic Party and played a major role in controlling New York City and New York state politics. Frank Costello was born in Lauropoli's mountain village in Calabria, in the province of Cosenza, in Italy, on January the 26th, 1891, at the registry office. His original name appears to be Francesco Castiglia, but in 1916, Castiglia officially changed his name to Frank Costello. He arrived in New York City when he was only 9 years old, traveling with his mother and his brother. There, they joined their father, who had already arrived in New York a few years earlier. Costello's parents settled in the East Harlem section of Manhattan, called Little Italy. It doesn't appear that his father came from a mafia family, or had he had any connections with the Italian underworld. The neighborhood where he lived as a young man was a harsh and violent environment. It was a community that lived under the influence of powerful crime bosses, as well as constant fear of the menacing Black Hand, the organizers of the extortion racket that preyed on the new Italian immigrants. In this environment, young Costello learned the harsh and violent ways of the New York streets, and a gun and a knife became common tools in the life of the young immigrant. He immediately distinguished himself in the world of petty crime. It was Francesco's older brother who had Americanized his name into Edward, the first to enter the world of New York gangs. Francesco, too, at the age of 13, became a member and called himself Frankie. Thus began his career as a petty street criminal, committing robberies and thefts, which landed him in prison in 1908 and then again in 1912. He soon became the leader of the 104th Street Gang, a group of young Italian thugs. In 1915, he got married to Lauretta Gigeman, his Jewish friend's sister. Later that year, at the age of 24, on March the 12th, Costello was arrested once again in Manhattan for carrying a gun as he left a barber shop. A very smart policeman had noticed the weapon and started chasing him. Costello attempted to flee, running into an alley, getting rid of the weapon as he ran. Although he was caught without the weapon on him, the judge at the trial didn't believe him, and he was sentenced. He served a 10-month sentence. Released from prison, Castiglia decided to stop committing crimes by carrying weapons with him. Frank swore that he would never go to prison again. This, however, didn't stop him from committing crimes. In fact, over the years, Costello extended his influence on the New York crime scene, hiring others to do the dirty work, that is, the violent acts, so not to get involved. He was actually really good at it and managed to stay out of prison for over 37 years. He understood that to make money in the world of crime, you had to use your wits. Costello made a name for himself in the crime scene due to his intelligence and violent approach. He made an important criminal connection with the first American mafia family, that of Giuseppe Morello. In fact, he was very close to Ciro Terranova, nicknamed the King of Artichokes. Costello was given the control of the gambling and debt collection in the areas of Manhattan and the Bronx. He collaborated with other distinguished mobsters like Michele Coppola, for example, who associated with the Masseria family in the early 20s during Prohibition, had a reputation of being a sadic and violent killer, so much so he was nicknamed the Trigger. Other well-known names were Joseph Joe the Baker Catania and Charlie Lucky Luciano. He and Luciano became friends and partners in many criminal activities. The two then joined other gangsters who ended up representing the elite of the American mafia, such as Vito Genovese, Gaetano Tommy Lucchese. Not only does he weave relationships with the new emerging younger gangsters like Lucky Luciano, Vito Genovese and Tommy Lucchese, but thanks to his wife and the allies in the area, he also became an ally with the Jewish bosses, Meyer Lansky and Bugsy Siegel. Their rackets involved robbery, theft, extortion, gambling, and narcotics. During Prohibition, they received financial support from Arnold Rothstein in the bootlegging of alcoholic beverages. Rothstein became something of a mentor to Costello, Luciano, Lansky, and Siegel while doing business with beer baron Dutch Schultz. Costello no longer had to resort to a gun to make a career in the criminal underworld, although his mafia friends and peers, men like Charles Lucky Luciano, Joseph Adonis, and Albert Anastasia, bloodthirsty leaders who rose to the top of mafia power in the 1930s, becoming legends in their own right. Costello wisely used bribery to influence politicians and the police so that Cosa Nostra could operate freely. Costello was not above associating with Irish criminals such as bootlegger William Dyer and gambling operator Frank Erickson. For decades, thanks to his political connections, Costello and the mafia dominated New York until the arrival of the Italian-born mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, known for being inflexible in fighting crime in the Big Apple.